privacy is a fundamental right that transcends socioeconomic boundaries and levels of status. I thought, okay, this is really universal. It's inherent in people's DNA.
Hi, everybody. This is Arlo Gilbert, co-founder and CEO of Osano, a leading data privacy management platform. And you are listening to the Privacy Insider Podcast. This show explores the past, present, and future of data privacy for privacy and business leaders alike, as well as anyone who wants to keep privacy top of mind. Hello and welcome to the Privacy Insider Podcast. My name is Arlo Gilbert. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and founder at Osano, but today I'm your host. We are thrilled to welcome Brent Homan, the Data Protection Commissioner for the Bailiwick of Guernsey. Brent brings over 20 years of experience in privacy and competition law, with a resume that reads like a greatest hits of global enforcement, from Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, to Equifax, to Clearview AI, Tim Hortons, and even Ashley Madison's breach. He is a pioneer behind international cooperation, co-founder of the GPEN Privacy Suite, and a driving force in the digital economy of regulation. From Canada's top privacy cases to leading Guernsey through major challenges, Brent is shaping the future of trust and compliance worldwide. Brent, welcome to the show.
Arlo, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here today.
So, Brent, you're the first regulator we've had on here, and in some ways it feels a little bit like I'm talking to the dark side. You know, we spend a lot of time trying to help people to avoid regulators and to stay away from being on their radar by doing all the right things. But I got to meet you before the show, and you're not on the dark side at all. You're a really nice guy to hang out with.
Yeah, I hope I'm not on the dark side.
How does one get involved in this? Tell us just a little bit about what you do and a little bit maybe about your background.
Sure. Well, right now I am the data commissioner for Guernsey. So basically I oversee the data protection and privacy laws in Guernsey. I didn't start out that way. I'm an economist by training, and I cut my teeth in the field of antitrust when I was with the Competition Authority back in Canada. Before I took this role here in Guernsey, I was a Deputy Privacy Commissioner of Canada with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. But I thought I'd come and have some fun on an island.
That is amazing. So Canada over to an island. And Canada has had some pretty exciting times in terms of data privacy. I mean, during COVID, I recall that Canada was really on the forefront of creating a lot of the public tracking of COVID. And how do you do that while remaining compliant and protecting privacy? And did you learn a lot at your time in Canada that you've taken to Guernsey?
Oh, absolutely. I spent over 10 years at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner there. And my primary role was enforcement. So I had the opportunity to oversee some very timely investigations, including against Clearview AI, which was facial recognition technology, as well as other areas in joint investigations, including with Ashley Madison. Remember that website for interesting dating opportunities.
Yes, I remember it. I have not ever used it, but I do know people who have used it, and I remember that. And the Clearview one, was that just a real layup? I mean, like, you kind of see what they're doing and you immediately are like, they're breaking every law. Which one do we pick?
Yeah, well, what was interesting about Clearview is that its facial recognition technology, it basically scraped billions of images around the world. So if you had a social media site or any type of presence online, it's likely that your image was in the Clearview database. And clearly, I don't believe you remember ever consenting to that. And at the end of the day, you know, what does that mean? That you find yourself in a potential lineup 24 hours a day, 365 days a year without doing anything because they were marketing this to enforcement agencies. So with that, from engaging with Clearview, they were encouraged to leave the Canadian market.
I like the soft words there. They were encouraged to leave the Canadian market. Well, so you were an economist. Now, I want to know what made you want to get into economics,
Right.
because that's a pretty dry field.
Do you know what? People say that, And that's what I thought before I got hooked. But I was really into economic philosophy that's inclusion of looking at rights, of ethics. And so what I found is that economics was a great way to understand the way the world works. It's a great way to kind of hone your skills with respect to analytics. And really, it's even a great way to learn skills like how to buy a car without, again, taking for a ride. So I realized that after doing a degree in political science, that it was actually good at economics. So that's why I focused on my graduate studies. I became an economist. And then my first job was as an antitrust regulator, reviewing mergers first with the Competition Bureau of Canada. I was eventually an assistant deputy commissioner there. But privacy, I guess I got to admit, I didn't think much about privacy, Arlo, before I heard about this. And then there was a headhunter that came around and talked to me about this opportunity at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. And I thought, well, privacy is a emerging field. It's interesting. Sounds like a good gig. I think I'm going to give it a shot. So that's how I kind of stumbled into it. And to tell you the truth, it was an experience, Arlo, in Ethiopia that solidified for me how important privacy is. I know that's a little bit out of
I mean,
left
I
field.
heard Ethiopia.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions right now.
Okay. Let me answer them then. In the summer of around 2013, I had the opportunity to accompany my niece, Rachel Homan, who's she's the current world champion for curling. You know, that sport with rocks and brooms and ice, right? And so she was the goodwill ambassador for the Canadian Hunger Foundation. And so I went with her on a mission to Ethiopia and to northern Ethiopia. This had nothing to do with privacy or my day job, or so I thought. Okay. So we go there, and the mission in the program was to introduce a savings culture with communities in this area, northern Ethiopia. And while this area was green and very lush at the time, it was the same area that was subject to the starvation and the droughts that happened in the 80s. So thinking about Bob Geldof and Live Aid, and that's the area. And the idea was to introduce a savings program so that the community could put away money in times of prosperity that they could take in times when they weren't prosperous. Again, a savings mentality that we take for granted, but isn't necessarily there in subsistence areas. So this was a program that the rules were made by the community. So there was a men's group that set the rules for the payouts. You know, if you lost livestock or if there was something happened with your farm, but also with the penalties. And so I looked at that list of penalties. The lowest penalty might be late for a meeting. Second highest after that, oh, you failed to make a contribution in order to the community fund. And then a higher penalty for causing a disruption at the meeting.
I
And
have
as
to
it went
interrupt
on,
you. What kinds of penalties are we talking about
we're
here?
talking about things like, okay, the currency's a burr. So 5 burrs, 1 burr is equal or 200 burrs equal to 1 pound. So, and I can't do the conversion in my head. So probably it's equal to a buck 50 US is equal to
So,
200
so
burrs.
they use financial penalties. I didn't know if
Exactly.
perhaps these were like
No,
societal, or
no.
you have to go stand outside for a few days or something like that.
No, they were financial penalties. And
Okay.
so it was interesting. So I was looking at that and then looking at the list. And you know what the highest penalty was that they would have to pay for revealing the personal information of a member of the community savings group? And that, Arlo, was on when I had my first privacy epiphany, realizing that privacy isn't just a luxury good in the Western world. No. Privacy is a fundamental right that transcends socioeconomic boundaries and levels of status. I thought, okay, this is really universal. It's inherent in people's DNA.
I love it. So you were
Yeah.
touched. I mean, you were touched.
Yes.
You found a calling in the strangest and most, serendipitous of ways.
And Arlo, that's when I also realized that it was just so fortunate to join a community a profession that was becoming so important at the time, that being the privacy field. And I know you talked earlier about, the dark side versus the white side, but you know what? We're all on the same side because if you talk to privacy professionals in the private sector as well as regulators, they're all privacy geeks and they're all about thinking about how do we advance this fundamentally important human right.
Well, this is a great transition because, I was entirely kidding about the dark side, but not really, right? I mean, when as somebody who's in the world of privacy, I understand that, the privacy commissioners and the data protection groups, they're completely there looking out for me. They're trying to take care of me and my rights and all those good things. Now, of course, if you're a business who's been fined, you probably don't look at the regulators with quite the same halo effect. But I am very grateful that there are regulators out there who are starting to enforce, and I'm so happy to see that we're seeing an increase in enforcement. There was a while where we all wondered, are these laws actually going to have any teeth? Or is it just going to be paper that we don't really do much with? And so, thank you for being part of the regime that's helping to make sure that our rights are protected.
Can I just say, Arlo, on that in terms of enforcement and fines? We just recently issued a fine to a medical service group in Guernsey. I think there's a way to do fines and enforce that really absolutely promotes privacy at the same time. In this situation, we fined the organization for £100,000. But what we did is we said, hey, if you're able to successfully implement this action plan that elevates the level of data protection within a year, you can forget about paying the last 25,000. So creating an incentive for, for having a system, from an enforcement action that leads to an overall elevation of the level of services. And this one group with this medical group, it was critical for services in the island of Guernsey.
It is interesting. We have seen, and I don't want to derail the conversation because I want to understand more about what it's really like to be a privacy commissioner. But I'm interested when you guys identify a violation. You say, hey, we just found this medical device company. We got a couple reports from citizens who told us they thought they might have been in violation, or maybe we discovered it on our own.
Or
And
a breach report.
or there was
Yeah.
a breach report,
Yeah.
right? A lot of ways they can get on your radar. Do you just immediately send out an invoice?
No, no, not at
Well,
all.
tell like, what's the process like? What
Okay.
happens?
Well, would you like to know something, Arlo? The majority of the actions we take in enforcement are about trying to find solutions outside of the formal process. Okay? Because not every issue, not every breach report represents a great risk. And there's always an opportunity to say, okay, can we perhaps make adjustments here or make adjustments there? And often we find solutions outside of the formal investigative process because, to tell you the truth, at the end of the day, what our objective is to get the best possible outcome for not only the citizens and their data rights, but for the company as well to get them in a better in a better position. But it's only when we're talking about the highest risks, perhaps the compromise of highly sensitive special data, health data, perhaps financial data, and where we see a systemic problem or a systemic risks that we think, hey, we have to take a little bit more formal action in here. So we try to be agile. Okay, if we can mediate a result and get a positive result without going back down the formal route, we'll do that. Because we have limited resources and unlimited demands on those resources. So we're trying to, we don't, we're not holding a hammer and thinking that everything is a nail.
I love that. I think it's unique in the sense that most businesses, when you're in business school or when you're learning how to be a business person, the idea that if a regulator comes knocking on your door, it usually means the beginning of some horrific, multi-year, painful thing that you're going to have to spend lots of money on. And I think a lot of companies and general counsels out there have been really trained that the moment a regulator talks to you, immediately call the most expensive law firm that you can and begin building walls, right? Because they've learned through groups like the SEC, right? If the SEC comes knocking, you're in for some misery. But it sounds to me, and from what I've read about other data privacy groups, that that's not really how it works with most data privacy groups. They're really just trying to fix the problems. They're not trying to go out and, make huge amounts of money for their state. They're just trying to protect their citizens. And I think that that's an important message for every listener. If you're not a privacy pro, is if the regulators call, just pick up the phone and talk to these nice people and ask what they want, because it's not like talking to the SEC.
No, no, it isn't. And we're one of those jurisdictions that has mandatory breach reporting requirements, as with many around the world. And the majority of the breach reports that we get end up in guidance and conversations and helping them in order to identify what the harms are and helping them to shore up their security safeguards. It's only certain that end up with a formal investigation. And I think part of that, Arlo, if you've noticed that it's a little bit different in the privacy world, also think about the revolutionary pace of technological development and innovation and how it impacts on privacy. So you have to be agile. You have to do what you can to find solutions that don't result in a 4-year investigation so that the solution becomes irrelevant to the problem. So if there's an opportunity to solve that problem early on swiftly, then take it.
Good advice. Well, we didn't get to talk a little bit about Guernsey, or, I kind of jumped right into, enforcement actions and what it's
Yeah.
like to be on the dark side. But let's step back. I don't know much about Guernsey. I'm guessing a lot of our audience does not as well. I'd love to learn a little bit about Guernsey and, where is it? What is it like there? Maybe a little bit about what it's like. What does your daily work involve? I don't think most people really have an understanding in what is the daily life of a commissioner?
Sure, I can take you through that. Well, first Guernsey. Guernsey is this beautiful, rocky, scenic island in the English Channel, and it's just off the coast of France. And it's a global financial hub. It's very much a vibrant hub with a thriving financial services sector of high global standards. So it's kind of like a mix between traditional British life and this very much high tech financial sector as well. That's the main driver of the economy. 60% of the economy is the financial services sector. And so that's kind of what it's like. In terms of a day-to-day life, like of a commissioner, hey, usually what I do is I get up early in the morning and I spend a bit of meditative or spiritual kind of like reflective time. Just kind of center yourself in the morning before I have to pack my 10-year-old daughter into the Range Rover. So we go and drop her off at school. And then, although there's no typical day as a commissioner here, I'll give you a couple things that often do happen. We're very fortunate here to have a very engaged media who is interested in data protection. And unfortunately, they realize that I'm available and will make myself available early in the morning. So often in the morning, I might be on a BBC radio show at 7:30 when people drive into work. And that can be talking about the latest enforcement action, or it can be talking about how do you avoid, what are great tips to avoid becoming a victim of identity theft. And then at work, I think one of the advantages of being on an island like this is its intimacy. It doesn't take long to get from one place to the other. So, the power of having one-on-one discussions with organizations, and we regulate the public sector and the private sector. Hey, forget about sending emails back and forth. Let's get people in the room together and let's have real conversations and let's answer questions in real time. So I think we really leverage that intimacy of the island. And I would say another thing that's really important when it comes to a smaller data protection regulator is that you do have to leverage the power of partnership. And that means collaborating with our international data protection partners, our privacy regulators, because I think, with partnership, it kind of expands your capacity to take action. and then it amplifies the impacts of your actions because you're speaking together. We've taken a very prominent role in that area. We're a co-chair of the International Enforcement Working Group of the Global Privacy Assembly. And we're also a co-coordinator of the Global Privacy Sweep that happens every year. And we just finished it a couple of weeks ago. And this year's theme was on protecting children. So the whole idea of taking action globally to have a positive effect, not only globally, but as well in protecting our children on the island.
All right, I have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
So I know in the States, we've had a number of states that have banded together to collectively enforce because they said, look, whether you're in California or Colorado, the actions you're taking are impacting people in our state too. And I'm imagining that in the European Economic Area, that kind of collaboration also exists. Is that the case? You're talking to the French authorities, or the German authorities, or the British authorities, and kind of co-coordinating because this breach or this action that might be violating privacy, it's impacting people in Guernsey, but it's also impacting people on the next rock. So how do you prioritize, and how do you decide? Do you coordinate as an enforcement and say, we'll take this one, you go take that one, or let's do it together? How does that work?
Well, how about this? I think the global privacy sweep is a good example of partnership and coordination at its best. And it's one of those not it's a less formal enforcement action, but it involves data protection authorities and privacy authorities from around the world. So we're talking, I think, close to 30 or 40 countries from around the world participated in this year's sweep. And the idea of it was for one day or one week, focus on an issue that has been identified as a shared global risk. And so this year it was about looking at websites that are either popular with children or targeted at children, because it can be a slight nuance with that. And then, so what we would do is go on and we'd replicate the consumer experience. Like, okay, go on, see how hard it is to get past the age authentication, see if there's good parental controls with these websites, and just really kind of get a sense of whether they are privacy protective for children or not. So this happened. And right now what's happening is that as a coordinator, we're getting all the results from all the countries around the world, and we're going to take a look at them. We're going to identify trends, and then we'll globally share our observations. So there'll be coordinated press statements around the world identifying here are some of the issues that we saw. Here are some of the good examples. And by doing that, by speaking with the united voice, it helps to amplify, it helps to kind of really hit home the issues. And I'll tell you what we often do in these sweeps that is helpful after the fact, and we did this last year as well, is that when we see, okay, well, we swept 20 websites, 16 of them had issues. We write to those and we say, hey, we conducted this sweep. Here's some of the issues we saw. We saw that the privacy policy was 20,000 pages long. We saw that there was no way to actually log off of not being a user. We saw, whatever the issues may be. And then we invite that organization to say, hey, could you respond to us within 2 months and let us know what you're doing in order to address the issues? And that, Arlo, is the magic, because what we found is that organizations are very receptive, especially when it's a global effort. And last year, our global privacy sweep looked at gaming sites and dark patterns. And you know what? 100% compliance. We got back all these responses of saying, hey, yes, we'll do this, we'll adjust this, we'll do this. And that was for us, for our data protection authority. But think about what that means, because you talked about enforcement. If we were to have investigated those organizations, it would have taken years and would have cost resources for ourselves and the organizations. So we were able to achieve in a matter of a few months what would have cost hundreds of thousands of pounds and years in order to get an outcome. So that, Arlo, is the power of partnership, and where, finding a way to get results and that benefits people's rights this year rather than too far down the road.
I love that. It's a really smart approach. Now, you've been talking a little bit about these sweeps, and I want to talk more about the sweeps and about children's privacy. But this is an area of interest to you, right? I mean, children's privacy is an area of passion. And when we chatted prior to the show, you shared that you spend time helping to educate. Being on a commissioner is not just the stick, but you're actually out there talking to kids and families. And I'd love to understand where this passion came from.
Well, this passion is not only in the world of privacy. I had this passion when it came to consumer protection as well, in terms of focusing on protecting children's rights. And I could actually point back to a point of time when I was in Canada and talking to a youth group up in the Yukon. Okay. So this might have been, I'd say, about 8 years ago. And I was on a cross country tour talking to different chambers of commerce. And then I was up in the Yukon and had an opportunity to talk with the youth group. So I thought, great. I went in there and I was all ready, and I was going to talk to them about all the dangers of be careful online, the dangers of bullying, the dangers of engaging with people that have bad intentions. And then, Arlo, as I was telling the standard, don't, here's what you got to think about, I noticed that I was losing them. And I saw the leader of that youth group, kind of like he was, his face was going blank, and I can usually keep people's attention. So I just stopped there and I said, okay, it's clear that you're not picking up what I'm throwing down. So what's the issue? So let's have a real conversation. What is it that how is it that you feel about this issue? And the gentleman was very respectful, but what he said is, hey, we've heard about online bullying. We've heard about the dangers. That's all we hear about. But we live in a small community that is in high north of Canada. And if there's any opportunity for us to kind of interact with people in other parts of the world, it's online. So it's actually something that is really key for us to develop. And then that's when I thought, wow, protecting children isn't just about telling them what to do, but really it's about listening and hearing what their interests are. And that's how we thought, okay, well, it's of limited help if you just say, don't. What you want to do is allow children and empower children to benefit from everything that the online and digital world has to offer, while at the same time identifying and helping them to guard against the risks. And that's the program that we have in Guernsey. So we go into schools and we talk to children, and we talk about, in a balanced way, here's the powers of AI, but here is the issues with deep fakes, and here's how you should guard against sharing information. And more importantly, actually, what we did is innovate and thought that, yeah, it's great that we talk to children. It's nice that we talk to teachers. It's nice that we talk to leaders, all these people about protecting children. But then realized we're missing someone important, and that's the parent. Because everyone always points to the parent. It's like, okay, well, what's the parent doing in order to protect them? That, and then the parent is sitting there hearing all these dangers, and they don't know what to do, and they're not equipped with the tools. So we've created a parents workshop that doesn't just talk about the dangers, but actually is practical. It says, okay, let's go right into the lion's den. These are the popular apps with respect to children that have risks that you have to be aware of. So we talk about Roblox, we talk about TikTok, we talk about Snapchat, and we give actionable advice in terms of how to protect your children on these platforms that relates to all platforms in general. So that's a new thing that we're doing, and kind of part of our way of creating this net to support and protect our children, all at the same time as listening to them. It was I forget who it was that said in terms of takes a village to raise a child.
Oh, it takes a village. I think that might have been a
Yes, Hillary
Clinton
Clinton,
era
I believe.
quote.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, what we say in Guernsey is that it takes an island to protect our children.
Well, I gotta tell you, if you ever decide to come to Austin, Texas, and put on a parental workshop, count me in because I have heard and seen plenty of those kind of generic workshops, and it's exactly what you described. You walk away going, "I didn't really learn anything. This was all stuff I know." But then you open up the apps and you get in and you find yourself going, "Wait, how do I get access to that? How do I even control? I don't even, there's a million settings in here and I'm pretty sophisticated." So that sounds like a really powerful tool.
Yeah, and not only that, I think the approach that we take, and I deliver these workshops personally because I'm a parent, and I start out that way of saying, "Hey, I approach this subject with humility because I don't have all the answers. And if somebody tells you that they have all the answers to protect children, they're feeding you a line. But what I do have is some information that I know as a privacy expert, and information I know from making all the mistakes that a parent and a dad can make. So let's talk about that. And I also want to hear about your experience as well. Creating that intimate environment to allow for having real conversations, not just handing out a leaflet and saying good luck."
Well, since you open the Pandora's box on kind of mobile and social, I would love to understand a little bit more. I mean, there's been a movement kind of occurring globally. People are calling for social media, mobile phone bans. As you're thinking about these parental workshops and you start thinking about a more global viewpoint, what do you think about these calls to action?
That's a very interesting topic, Arlo. And you're right. It is a movement. It's something that's being considered. There's certain jurisdictions where it's been implemented. In Australia, they've implemented a sort of a ban, and it's also being considered in other jurisdictions. And my personal opinion is that I have completely respect for the motivation behind that. There's a lot of very unfortunate incidents that result in children being harmed online, but I don't think that a ban is the answer. I think, in fact, an outright ban on social media or mobile phones for children, I think the risk is that it just drives them to different areas, accessing it in more clandestine manner. And in fact, then all of a sudden, they don't even have the benefit of the protections of having their parents around.
It's a little bit like the prohibition era
Well,
of
that's it.
alcohol. You're big drinking bathtub gin instead of something that went through an approval
Yeah.
process and a quality control.
Yeah, bands don't have a really good record of effectiveness. They often have a good motivation, but I guess, think about it that with children or with adults learning how to drive a car, there's usually a learning process. You just don't wait till they're 19, throw them the keys of the car and say good luck. And similarly, as parents, don't we want to be the ones to help to show and model responsible online behavior? That's part, the digital world isn't going away. It's their future. And children are actually, pound for pound, they're smarter than us, but we have more experience. So we still have an obligation to help to raise children in the digital world. So I think that is more important, to try to model and promote safe habits so that they can benefit from all the promise that the digital world has to offer while being aware and being protected from the risks. Hey, it's not easy, but as parents, none of us asked to be parents in the most challenging of areas in terms of the digital areas, but here it is. So it's just one other area that we need to raise our kids in.
Well, that's fascinating insights, and I can't agree with you more that the bans are a little silly because the fact is that as a parent, you could always enforce your own ban if you want. If you don't want your kids to have a phone, don't buy them one.
Exactly. I think it's all about balance. And some of the things that we teach at the workshop is that you can put in place some very, very easy parental controls that set limits on times, that allow you to kind of see what your children are engaged in. And then we also suggest that, show an interest, ask questions, establish trust, maybe play a game with them, get a sense of what's going on. And children and people usually don't react positively to the don't, no, no, no type of approach. But it is, I gotta say that it is difficult for parents these days because they have a lot of anxiety. They're fed a lot of these very kind of horrific kind of scenarios. So realizing that, they can be forgiven, we can all be forgiven for thinking, "Do you know what? I just want to protect my child while they're in the home, and so that nothing can happen." But I think that our obligations go further than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's nothing in my own personal life that has caused more conflict in my family than when we turned on screen time on my teenage daughter's phone. You just never seen anybody get that angry. Well, maybe you have, but wow, I was very surprised.
It's very revealing, and, once you put on screen time, then you see how habit forming this can be. And by the way, we do it as well as adults. Like, how many times are you saying, "Hey, don't do this," and you realize that you're doom scrolling on LinkedIn and that, and then next thing you know, it's 45 minutes in and you haven't done anything and you haven't done the dishes or yeah, absolutely. So I think that that's a good point to make, and one pointer that we give is that, when you are establishing limits, do it with your children, help them to set the limits. What's reasonable for bedtime? And what's most important though is that then stick by them and don't negotiate. Like Arlo, I am a negotiator. Like part of my job historically has been to negotiate, and I have had an opportunity to negotiate with some large platforms and organizations in the world. And I've had a fairly good record. But you know what? I lose every time in negotiating against my wife or my child. So it's like 5 extra minutes, 10 extra minutes. Are you sure? Well, I just need to finish this video. And if you do that, then I know I lose every time. So I just have to sit to the hard, fast rule.
That's awesome advice. And we've talked a lot about coming at things from the angle of a privacy regulator, right? You're teaching, you're educating, you're enforcing, you're collaborating, you're partnering, but that's all from the enforcement side. And the thing is that you're an enforcer by day, but when you walk out that door, you're a dad. You're just a guy, and like all of us, you also probably use social media or engage in these things. And so I'm really interested to understand. We often say, do as I say, not as I do. And I'm guilty, of course, of my own habits. But I'm curious, as a regulator, do you have any kind of do as I say, not as I do kind of moments?
Do you know what, Arlo? I might have a little bit of a different take on that because I think I know where you're going. The whole idea of we're privacy champions. So do we protect all our information? Do we not share anything? Do we sit on the island? I don't. Like I'm actually probably decide to share more information, whether it be with an app or with a website, than you typically expect. But you know what? I don't think that amounts to a privacy sin because privacy isn't about secrecy. It isn't about holding everything. Privacy is about control and having the agency to exercise that control. It's about having control over your information. So even if I choose, you know what? I want to share my location with this app because it's going to help get the pizza to my door quickly, or I want to share my interests because I want to know more about grooming pugs because I have a pug. Then I'm exercising that control. I'm not committing a privacy sin by sharing information. I'm saying I'm making an informed decision that yes, I'm going to share this information, and that's part of my agency. The problem is where if I choose not to share such information, and then I find out later that it's scraped. But so, anyways, in a roundabout way, Arlo, I don't feel guilty that I do share information sometimes. but it's certainly important for me to have control over what I share and what I don't.
That is a wonderful position, and I think, as I think about this, I realize that, look, sweeps don't only happen because the office decides to sit down and go through complaints or they have a particular list. I've heard from other folks that sometimes enforcement actions happen because the privacy regulator is using the product and they discover something horrible while they're using it. And they're like, I really didn't want to have to bring my work home with me, but how do I not look at this? Does that happen to you?
Oh, Arlo, I have a great example of that. That's a real, I'd say, a success story on this island. This wasn't because of the complaint, but we learned that there was a new health program. There's a health organization on the island. Their objective was to improve the health of islanders, including children, right? And so they introduced, Arlo, a wristband program into schools. So this is like a wristband tracker. So seeing about how many steps the kids are taking and tracking them to help kind of get some data to target for kind of improvement programs. So very, very laudable goals. This is all about improving the health of children. And we heard about it because some of us have children and some of these notifications were coming out. But when I looked at it, we realized, okay, well, this is about tracking or collecting information of children. Steps is still health information. So that's special category data that's sensitive, and it's children. And we realized that this was on a opt-out rather than an opt-in basis. So we kind of engaged right up front with the organization, and we said we recognize the laudable kind of objectives of this, but there's certain areas that we are looking for you to address. And we did this outside of investigation. So the health improvement organization was really quick to engage with us and say, "Oh, okay, we didn't think about that." And in a very short period of time, we engaged with them and schools and to ensure that this was on an opt-in rather than an opt-out basis. The transparency was better. We understood what was helping having with this health wristband. So we got a positive result that if we had investigated, we'd probably interrupt a very, very useful and beneficial program. But what's interesting is it didn't stop there. We looked at the wristband technology and realized that while it was being introduced on the island, it was done by a company that was selling it to schools all across the United Kingdom, 1,500 schools across the United Kingdom. Okay, and they weren't responsible for the communications like we did on the island. But we thought, hey, why don't we kind of like take a look at the product itself? And so we engaged with that company and we looked at it. And to tell you the truth, a lot of it was in pretty good shape, but we saw opportunities for better transparency about what's happening with the wristband and that. So they agreed to make changes. At the end of the day, this little issue that happened on the island that we became aware of, it resulted in positive privacy changes, not only on the island, but to the benefit of 1,500 schools across the United Kingdom. So that's how you can be a small island having a supersized positive effect. And again, because we looked at that in an informal measure outside of the investigation, we were able to get a result quickly without interrupting a very beneficial health program for children.
So I guess we would call you a privacy superhero. We've talked a lot about a lot of different topics. We talked about your background. We talked about Canada, Guernsey, children's privacy, Ethiopia, really of running the gamut. But what we haven't talked about is the future. And I'm really curious to understand, as a regulator, what keeps you up at night right now? I mean, you obviously have existing privacy regulations. You got a duty and a clear sense of mission to go and resolve these things, hopefully in an amicable manner. But what do you worry about in terms of the go forward?
Okay, right now, this is what's keeping me up at night, and it's common in terms of the theme. but I have a very specific take on it. And then it's relates to AI and basically the frenetic and urgent pace at which public and private sector organizations are feeling the need to adopt AI, knowing that they need to think about how to do it safely, but not necessarily knowing what safety looks like. So you combine that with what I see as the myth that privacy and innovation work at cross purposes with each other, because I think that the only way that you can have a successful, enduring innovation is if you build in privacy from the get go. And I guess the concern is that there is this very, very fundamental feeling amongst organizations to adopt AI without going through what they need to think about it. And so I think it's our obligation to help them realize the power. And it's really powerful AI. It has done wonders for bringing medical support to parts of the globe that traditionally haven't, to bringing education, to helping to guard against crop failures. But I think what's important is, as regulators, is that we find a way to ensure that they can adopt it and implement it into their systems in a responsible manner rather than MacGyver it in to their business model in a haphazard manner. We want them to be successful with this very powerful product. So I think that to me, that's something that I'm thinking about a lot, Arlo, is how can we best assist organizations in the successful implementation of AI, this powerful tool. And that's why we're looking at, and we have been kind of releasing guidance in the area to try to give areas of, okay, well, this is what you need to think about, and this is what you need to guard about, and just to help people along that journey. Because I think that's the sense I'm getting, is that everyone's rushing like, okay, we need to adopt it. We need to adopt AI. And they're like, okay, well, what does that look like? And for something that it's one of those things that as powerful it is, you don't want to implement it the wrong way. So how can we encourage people to not have too much of a panic of implementing it and then figuring out what they did after? I think that's the big challenge that not only myself, but many regulators are having, because, we want to support that powerful technology, but obviously in a way that mitigates potential harms that can have for people's rights.
That was amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Brent. This has been an incredible episode. I know I've learned a lot. I hope our audience has learned a lot, and I hope you've had a nice time joining.
I've had a great time, Marlo. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, folks, and if you want to learn more about Brent's work or you want to hear more of his thoughts, please tune in to the ODPA Guernsey podcast. Just type it in, Guernsey podcast, ODPA. There's probably not a lot of them out there, and you can find it on SoundCloud. They do some really interesting stuff. They've done some deep historical dives on privacy back to the Roman era. So tune in, and I'm certain that it will blow your mind. Brent, thanks for being here. And for all our guests, have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Privacy Insider Podcast. You can find a full transcript of this episode and any show notes at osano.com. That's www.osano.com. And while you're there, get access to an excerpt of my book, The Privacy Insider: How to Embrace Data Privacy and Join the Next Wave of Trusted Brands, which is now available on Amazon for purchase. Until next month, take care. And remember, data privacy is a fundamental human right, y'all.